it's been a lot in the news. Certainly, we've known some people who decided to make the big leap. We're going to be talking about the Great Resignation, right? It's what's in all the news, and lots of companies are worried about it. We've got some thoughts about what we think may be causing some of it from our own research, from our own conversations, from some anecdotes that we've heard, and we'd love to talk a bit about some of the statistics as well.
No, that sounds great. And look, I think we do have some statistics, right, that we can probably cover because there is a difference on the rate of people that are resigning or not, according to the age groups, right? Do you have some of that, Carlos?
I do. I think a big number for us to, just wrap our heads around is that in July, 4 million people, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, decided that they were going to pack it all in. They decided to follow their hearts. They've been thinking about it for a long time, and they decided, I've had enough. I'm gonna quit, and they did, and they walked off. And frankly, the number has remained pretty high. So that's one statistic to think about.
But that wasn't for every age group, was it?
Well, 4 million is across the board. But if you look at the levels of resignation based on age group, a couple of other statistics stood out. One of them was that it is highest, frankly, among people who are what they call mid-career workers. So people who are roughly from 30 to 45 years of age. So that was, one of the big statistics. The other one was that it seemed to impact the healthcare and the high-tech industry more than a lot of the other industries. Although, for a long time, retail, for example, has been struggling to find workers as well. The resignation was really from those other two sectors. That's where we saw the bulk of them.
And yet, I believe, and correct me here if I'm wrong, but for the people in the age 60 to 70 or 55 to 70 or so, the resignation actually fell. We didn't have that many.
I think that's right. Among older workers, you saw that they didn't leave that often, right? But you definitely saw it among that middle group. We didn't see it among younger workers as much either. And the theorists believe that the main reason for that is because younger workers typically are getting paid a little bit less. And they've got high bills and they can't afford to. Yet, people who are a little bit more established in their career, maybe they've got a little bit more money in the bank, maybe they've got a little bit more resources, maybe they're married, and so they're dual earning couples or what have you. They've got more resources, and frankly, they have the luxury, if you can put it that way, to quit in some cases. But the real issue is not that they're quitting; it's why they're quitting. What have you heard?
No, that is true. No, look, I think you mentioned before it varies by industry. Definitely technology and healthcare. And I speak from experience, someone very close to me, because with the COVID, issue that we've had for the last almost 2 years now, a lot of the healthcare workers have been extremely exhausted, going into different shifts. You get a little more money and depending on the shift and all that, but they're just running 12-hour shifts 3, 4, 5 days a week. And on top of that, you're risking your personal health and all that. And look, from what I understand, when people go to the hospital, clearly you're not feeling well, right? So you're not in the most loving demeanor, so to speak. But then you have a healthcare worker that is exhausted, and he and she has to deal with your issue, and on top of that, your illness and his or her risk of being infected. And I think while there's been a lot of recognition on the tremendous work they're doing, the remuneration and the long hours is just too much.
They haven't fixed that part yet.
No, they haven't fixed that part. The funniest thing is, just to jump in this, for instance, somebody who works in the, let's take a nurse, for instance, right? Works in the ER. She could have, 2 years experience or 20 years experience. There's a big pay range and differences depending on the experience, right?
Sure.
But the reality is that when you're an individual that is sick or has an ailment and you go to the ER, you deal with the individual regardless as a nurse, right? It's not like, well, you're 2 years into practice or experience, don't deal with that.
Right.
It's an emergency, deal with it. You or the person that's got 20 years experience. But at the end of the day, you're going to have a difference in compensation.
Yeah.
How do you explain that, right? I mean, if you were in accounting, if you were in engineering, you clearly have levels of experience for levels of compensation.
I mean, having worked in healthcare myself and healthcare services, one of the things that we saw was it was a supply and demand issue. I mean, the reality of it is that we don't have nearly as many nurses as we actually need for the hospitals that we have, for the urgent care centers, for the various other healthcare providers. We don't have enough, and so that has forced the salaries up, and in fact has closed the typical gap that you see in in nursing. One of the other things which contributes to it is, and you'll know this, right? Many nurses join that profession and they stay in that profession. And one of the things that we know is that when people do that, they don't move around a lot. One of the other natural kind of phenomena is what you call salary compression, right? So their salaries don't keep up with what the market is. So if you have the combination of companies having to pay nurses, right? Especially even new nurses that don't have a tremendous amount of experience, top dollar in order to attract them because they're competing with every other provider to do it. That's going to force it up. And then of course you have nurses that, may be working for a hospital or a doctor or a healthcare provider for 10, 15, 20 years, and they've got the salary compression as well. It's no wonder. And it can be a thankless job, right? You talk to a lot of nurses and they talk about the mission around it. But the reality of it is that it is a tough job. And if they're looking around and they're seeing that, a nurse that's 2 years out of school is making just a bit less than what they're making, that's going to be a problem, right? People are going to feel really dissatisfied with that arrangement.
No, and to that point, I think there is, I just think in that particular industry, there's an opportunity to revamping the whole compensation scheme and service and efficiencies and all that. But that's just my opinion, folks. The other area also happens to be in technology as well.
Yeah.
Right. Technology has been under the gun, delivering, with many aspects of workers that are putting in long hours, for projects. And I believe to the question earlier, why are we having this resignation?
Yeah. Why in high tech in particular?
Right. And
you almost understand it on the healthcare side based on what we've just discussed, but what's going on the high tech side?
Well, the reality is people are just burnt out. There's just no way of saying it. The workload is just being too much. And I think we will have an opportunity maybe to do another quick take on this remote work that is not just a trend. I think it's just a game changer for a lot of individuals. We were just talking earlier, you and I, commuting to work. It would take us about an hour each way. I lived in LA for a short time. Well, not so short, but it would take me almost 2 hours each way to get to work. That was almost 3.5 to 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's an extra day a week of life, of just getting to work. Now you commute an hour, that's 2 hours a day. That's 10 hours a week.
Easy. And so do you think it's high tech workers that that may be one of the contributors for those folks?
So I think high tech workers, what they've realized is that, we have to put a lot of hours doing, whether it is the coding or whatever administration they're doing in technology. And they're just realizing I can work from home and I can do probably a lot of freelance work, and the demands are just too overwhelming. I think.
Go ahead.
No, I think a lot of the workers, especially like you were saying, in the 25, 30, 35, 40, they've got enough experience to establish themselves with some level of expertise. They can find let's say a consulting gig, on their own or with another company that offers that flexibility. And that's what they're resigning.
I think you may be onto something. I mean, some of the people I've talked to who, work in IT or tech in general, have talked a bit about how, there's always been a bit of an underrepresentation, more need, if you will, for programmers, for architects, for networking staff, and so on and so forth. And, up until maybe 10 or 20 years ago, the traditional route of getting those folks was by, going into universities where they had those folks and trying to recruit them from there. Then, of course, you have the advent of social media, and suddenly, Google needs all these people, Facebook needs all these people, Twitter needs all these people, LinkedIn needs all these people, and just, go down the line with every social, media company that you can imagine. Add to that all the natural technology or traditional technology needs that you had in big companies that, had IT departments or, leverage technology for their businesses or what have you. And it's been known for a long time that we would not be churning out enough technical people, right? This is one of the reasons why it is that we saw, great rises in the economies of India and China in particular, because what do they do more than anybody else? They turn out engineers, right? They do it at a much higher pace than we do. I remember 15, 20 years ago, looking at a study, and at that point, they were already predicting that they were going to need something like 350,000 engineers a year just to maintain the sort of existing need. That was before, for the most part, social media came around. So you imagine what the number is right now, and we'll have to bring the statistic at some point. And so you can see that, A, you've got this tremendous need for it. B, the technology continues to change, which means that people have to keep their skills up all the time, which means that the ones that do have, knowledge of this language and that language and that language, or that architecture and this architecture, or that networking protocol and this networking protocol, how they are going to be in high demand, and how their companies, for lack of, not having other resources that can do that, are going to put all of that pressure on the, 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 that actually have the skills to do it. In some respects, that is certainly contributing, I think, to the sort of great resignation for technical workers. But I think the other thing which is really happening there, and maybe this is not such a negative consequence of it, is that companies are getting much smarter about where they find their technical people, right? You don't have to go very far these days to figure out that there's a bunch of free resources online, and you can learn some very, very basic programming languages. If you've got, Python, if you've got, JavaScript, if you can do some HTML5 and things like that. I mean, you've got it made. You've got people who don't have college degrees who are sitting for certification programs, maybe investing 6 months a year, and they are, getting jobs that are, $100,000 and above, right? Jobs that they would have never had any, the chance to get if it weren't for that need, right? And if you can get free skills on top of that, it's a wonderful place to think about it. One of the things I do in my own work is sometimes I coach and I consult with, early career folks who are trying to figure out what they want. And anybody who has any kind of, interest in tech, I say, hey, think about it, man, because you can make a lot of money in a real short period of time, and it can be a real career for you because the technology is constantly changing. So, a long way of saying there's some negative things that are coming out of it, but I think there's some positive things that are coming out of the "quote unquote" Great Resignation as well. What do you think?
No, I think you hit multiple points in there. Well, I do agree with the fact that there is a huge shortage. I think it's 500,000 nurses. How many more programmers out there? There was just a shortage completely. I do believe that, as you mentioned, they're overworked and people are just tired. If anything, the last couple of years have shown us how fragile life is. So you can't just work and figure out that you're going to be here tomorrow, because sometimes you don't know. But, one of the things that also we're leaving out, I think that is a big number, is restaurant and hotel workers.
Yeah.
Clearly they were affected because, we didn't have any people going to hotels and traveling and so on, and restaurants. But even the ones that were working during this time, whether it's fast food or some specific hotels or limited hotels, those workers felt the pressure and of the risk of the low wages. And they're just rethinking their lives. I think personally, and this is just my opinion, that as they looked alive and they looked at their families and maybe, and we feel for you guys if a loved one was lost, with a close or, or a friend or something. When that happens, you rethink about what is important to you. And when you start doing that, you start saying like, well, if I'm not being appreciated, and it's not just financial. You and I know this. We're seasoned enough to understand that money is always a good thing, right? But it's not just financial. It's when you're appreciated, when you're listened to, when you actually feel that people or the company has your interests at heart. And I'm not going to mention names. So there's a major airline that when we started the pandemic, that was saying like, "Hey guys, we're in this together." And I was, cynically saying like, "Yeah, where were you when, I wanted to bring an extra suitcase? It's $25, $50, but now we're together in this, right?"
Right. We're in this together until we're not.
Until we're not, right? So I think it's an awakening for businesses, for managers, for leaders. No, and clearly people are talking and they're saying like, "Hey guys, we can't be doing this any longer, not under these conditions."
Yeah. It's a great point, and I know we don't want to go forever on the quick take. I'll leave my comment with this or leave this last comment. Gallup has been looking into some of the reasons that people left during the quote unquote Great Resignation or are still leaving. And in fact, based on the reasons that they've come up with, they've suggested that we need to rebrand the Great Resignation as the Great Discontent, right?
I like that.
Because frankly, it's in looking at the reasons for it, they've figured out that, for most people, they've been thinking about leaving for a very, very long time, but they didn't have the wherewithal to do it, right? But what happened is between the pandemic, the way that employers responded to it, the way that, some people wound up leaving either because of fear for their health or because they genuinely were ill. A lot of the responsibilities fell on the remaining workers, right? And what it did was it exacerbated feelings that they already had of discontent around, working for the employer that they worked for under the conditions in which they worked, and not getting the rewards, the recognition that they have always felt that they needed, much less in an instance where organizations are trying to figure out how to pay the bills themselves, right? So, their thesis seems to be emerging that, a lot of this was kind of baked in already, right? And it just took for the right circumstances to send people out the door, and they believe that the core root cause here is just general discontent, which means a lot, right? I think there's a bit of a reconciliation that organizations are going through right now to try and figure out how they get them back, and importantly, how they keep them.
That's a great point, Carlos. And I agree with that. The great discontent, like they say, people don't leave companies, they leave managers if you're not happy in your current situation, right? But I think there's going to be an opportunity. And in the last couple of years, people didn't have a place to go. Jobs were tight. Mm-hmm. Now they're not as much anyway. So they find other opportunities and they move on. So look, this is our take on this. Clearly, we're not saying that this is. I think what I'm saying. I want to speak for myself on this one, Carlos. I think that the landscape has changed. Remote work, is something that is going to continue in the trend. Maybe we could do a quick take on that too. Some companies feel like people are going to come back to the office. The reality is that I don't know if they want to give up a whole day of their lives just commuting, just to be in the office, when technology has proven that we could be just as effective, remotely. Look at you and I doing this together in different places.
Absolutely.
Okay. But until then, please give us your comments, give us a like, subscribe. Let us know
what you think as well. We'd love to hear your ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's going on, the stories that you've experienced or that you've heard. We'd love to hear those.
Absolutely. So yeah, guys, this is our take. Last words. How do we close, Carlos?
Well, we always close every one of our podcasts or our quick takes the same way. Be
good
and
do good.
Do good.
Till next time, guys.
Be good and do good. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.